I want to introduce our panelists. First is Andrew Sernatinger. He's a production baker and activist in Madison, Wisconsin. Spent 3 years organizing with the Port Militarization Resistance Campaign in Washington State, and he's been since then working with labor and community activists in Wisconsin. He's currently working on preparing community budget forums and organizing a local labor notes troublemaker school, which is going to be taking place in April. You're probably going to have a pretty full registration for that school, I suspect. Andrew is also a member of Solidarity, a socialist, feminist, anti-racist organization.
Hi, hello. Hi. So I thought I would start and do kind of a big picture thing a little bit. Like, it seems like talking to a lot of folks here, you guys have been following pretty closely what's been going on. I don't need to do it blow by blow for you. So I thought I would kind of talk about a little bit of the context and then get into what are some of the key lessons, some of the major conceptual things that we had to take away from Wisconsin. And before I do that, I wanted to point out a couple of things. I mean, first of all, I'm not a union member. I've never been in a union, but I work with a lot of union members, and so I mean, I can't speak to the experience of rank and file union members. And also that the work that we do and being here today is definitely the product of a lot of collective discussions, stuff that, you know, it's not like me and Adam are like these awesome geniuses that came up with this. You know, we do a lot of talking, and we want to kind of tip our hats to other folks in Wisconsin that have helped us along with this. So that said, I thought, you know, we could start with a little bit of context, and Stephanie really set it up really well for us. She took a lot, I was going to say, so. So I thought that maybe in understanding how we got to Wisconsin, it might be helpful to start by saying, like, we've been in about 30 years or more of neoliberal attacks, stuff that's kind of put the working class in retreat across the entire globe, and we're finally kind of being like, when is this ever going to stop? Are we ever going to see a fight back? And specifically after the market crash in 2008, then we started to see not so much fight back as actually a greater austerity, a clampdown on working folks across the world. And so I remember kind of thinking to myself at one point, like, you know, seeing stuff happen in France where my mom's family lives, and a bunch of students that I know in the UK, and then all this stuff is like, when is it going to be our turn? When is it going to be our turn, you know? So, yay! So I think that it's important to point out that for the United States in particular, I mean, like, this is like a global assault on working people, but in the United States, this is a very definitive political project. It's not just Wisconsin. Similar bills with almost identical language was proposed and introduced actually in Ohio, in Michigan, in Florida, soon after Tennessee, in New York. All of these things happened just about simultaneously, and they actually picked key targets. They picked places where unions had a specific amount of social power in society, and to really make things happen. And they knew that these were going to be key grounds to push an agenda. So we hit ground zero, really. And in pointing that out, I mean, I'm not just saying like, oh, this is a great coincidence, but actually this was a language that was drafted by a think tank called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And if you've seen some of the stuff that's come out of University of Wisconsin professor William Cronin, he's actually getting clamped down on right now because he was the one that was pointing a lot of this stuff out. So this is definitely where we're coming from. This is a concerted attack. It's something that they're coming at us hard, and they're going to keep coming. And the public sector fight is not just limited to public sector unions. We're seeing a lot more than that. So I think after that, it's kind of hard to understand, like, how did we arrive with Governor Walker in particular? Like, where did this guy come from? And it sounds like you guys are in a similar situation in Toronto. Like, you know, economic crisis, all sorts of things, why we go right instead of left. In the United States, I think that we're in a particular situation because of our two-party structure, and there was a lot of actual resentment about the Democratic Party's failure to deliver on any of their promises that they made in the 2008 election cycle. There was a lot of hope, all sorts of expectations to come out of the new Congress and out of the Obama presidency. And after 2 years of things actually not getting better at all, but actually getting much worse, and troops going into Afghanistan and all this stuff, it was just kind of ripe for the right to make their ascendancy. So in trying to understand it, I think it's basically like if you give working people two shitty choices, they're going to make a shitty choice, and that's kind of where we're at. So this was a kind of a vote of no confidence in the Obama administration and the Democrats in particular. Sorry. So let's see then. Yeah, so it's a vote of no confidence, and this was like, we want to see something change. We don't know what's going to change, but something's got to be different now, and that's Walker in a nutshell. So then I think what happened after that was more or less that that people knew that who Walker was going to be. They knew that this guy was going to attack public sector unions, and that hypothetically this was supposed to help us all out and all this, but we were actually quite surprised that people on the left who were paying attention had no idea how quickly this was all going to happen. No idea at all. I mean, we knew that they were going to throw away the federal money for transit system and all this kind of stuff, but man, it came fast. So I think in terms of like framing this in some lessons here, I mean, like how do we think about that conceptually? And what I wanted to drive home here is like I kept hearing this thing like, well, Walker has awoken the sleeping giant. He's awoken these sleeping people, and it really it just got to me. I hate that. I hate hearing that. Because basically what they're saying is like working people are asleep, they're passive, and they don't do anything, and then you got to prod them and someone's got to jot them, and that's what will get us going. But I think what Wisconsin showed us, even for those of us that kind of theoretically post some of these things, but what it really showed us is that people were paying attention to all the day-to-day stuff. I mean, when the signs came out, they had all sorts of stuff. They were paying attention to Egypt, where they were paying attention to the bailouts, they were paying attention to deindustrialization and foreclosures, and of course the train money and all those sorts of things. So people are extremely upset, and this political space opened, finally, where there was a possibility and a potential for something to happen, because it had to happen, because nobody was putting up any kind of fight. So in the day-to-day, like working people are conscious and they're thinking about these things, but there's just, it's like, what are you going to do if there's no possibility? Then why waste your time if you've got to work on survival? So anyway, I mean, in terms of the spontaneity of this whole thing, I think, how do we understand this? Was this a spontaneous eruption, or wasn't it, or what happened? And I think that, it was and it wasn't at the same time. I mean, the bill was announced on a Friday, and it was said that, we're going to push it through on a Tuesday. How much planning can anyone possibly do in like 4 days? There's not a lot. So we didn't know what was going to happen. And actually, I was having a drink in a bar on a Monday night, and we saw people go out and had a lobby day, and it was like, what's going to happen? Oh, we're all going to be in trouble. It's going to be the end of it. But then, since nobody was coming out for this fight, there was just this huge thing on the next day, on that Tuesday, where people started turning out, like, well, we at least have to be here and bear witness and make our voices heard, and firefighters turned out, and obviously they had to be organized in some sense. I mean, firefighters don't usually just come out for union rights on any given day, right? And then the same thing as high school students had organized themselves to walk out, and teachers had organized the sick out. So I think that what this kind of says is, like, they're thinking about these things, and this space opens up where there's a complete lack of leadership. This first week was the AFL-CIO, the Democratic Party, they weren't going to do anything. And so it was like, what are you going to do? And people did rise to the task in this moment. They used whatever infrastructure they had, and they moved it. So yeah. So I think that what we saw, though, is that this kind of sense of our own power kept building and building. Where it's like, well, yeah, we're going to turn out, and look who's coming with us. Firefighters are coming, and teachers are coming, and these people are leading themselves, and the union leadership was way behind. They didn't even see this coming at all. Who could have seen it, So in this moment, people start getting all this heightened consciousness and the expectation and growing in militancy, and it's quite inspiring. I mean, you all are here to hear about. But I think that the next conceptual thing that we really have to hit on is, subjectively we can have consciousness and we can develop militant demands and start to move for tactics, but we have to be organized and we have to respect the actual standing forces in society. And I want to particularly call them out as the three kinds of institutions or bureaucracies or however, that really played a big role. I mean, workers are fighting Walker, but then they have to fight among their own leadership and among the institutions that are supposed to advocate for them. So the first one, I think, quite obviously, is the labor leadership, the labor bureaucracy. In Wisconsin, this is most prominently the AFL-CIO, but some change to Wind Federation unions were still there as well. And they weren't going to fight at all. They had planned for a lobby day. They were like, well, we're going to deliver some Valentines, because it was February 14th, that'll say, we love our university, we love our services, please don't cut it, And then their plan was to try to get a couple... Their plan was to try to get a couple of Republican senators to change their mind and then kill the bill. And if not, we'll get them in 2012 at the next election. And that was it. They didn't want to do anything. But as workers started organizing themselves and pushing and trying to use their local union leadership in their own locals, they forced the AFL-CIO Federation to follow. They had to, because they had to remain legitimate. They had to get something back, otherwise they're backwards and they have no place in this, and that just can't happen, right? So then what happens? Trump just shows up on a Friday, gives a big rah-rah speech, and then starts briefing people on what's got to happen, and starts to say, here's what the platform is. And on that Monday, they announced it. Even though workers were thinking about strikes and thinking about continuous sick-outs and all kinds of things, they were like, we want this whole thing gone. All of the union leaders, Mary Bell from Wisconsin Education Association Council, was the Wisconsin teachers basically, and Marty Beal from the AFSCME Council, they were like, we'll concede to everything. You can take whatever you want from our unions. You can pass the bill, just don't get rid of collective bargaining, and that's it. You can take away our ability to bargain except for anything except for our wages. Just let us be a union, and we're good with that. And that was, it was terrifying. It really was, and I think that we really have to recognize the power that they have and the legitimacy, the ability to mobilize people and all these things about them. Because most workers themselves, if you ask them, and we did, what do you think about this? It's like, this whole bill's got to go. We know that this is going to affect working people across the board. I'm on Badger Care or whatever, and that's where we ended up. We had to end up fighting the labor leadership. The second, I think, major institutional force that we had to fight was the Democratic Party. And I think that you guys it sounds like you have a little bit of a better situation in not being a two-party structure, but not a whole lot better. And they also had no intention of fighting a very similar thing. Well, maybe we can work together and come to a compromise and pass a less bad bill with a little bit of other stuff. And they obviously did have an interest in making sure that unions didn't go away, because unions are a major source of their funding. This would really hurt their party. So that was as far as they were willing to go in the same sense. They only wanted collective bargaining to stay so that way they could maintain funding for themselves, and to hell with the rest of the working class. Like if people were going to be immiserated because they had no health care, because disability funding was all gone, because education funding would be gone, that's too bad. That's just going to be what it is. And I think that the fact that they left the state has nothing to do with them being good people or whatever. It is because they also saw a moment where they could restore faith in the party, where people were so upset about what had happened over the last 2 years, and this was their chance to really rebuild the Democratic Party by leaving and stopping the bill in its tracks, at least for a little while. But then what you'll notice is the actual behavior of these people was never in line with what we wanted, ever. Democratic Assembly person Brett Halsey was like, take my hand, and the best thing you can do is leave this building and stop this occupation of the building because you're getting in the way of the legislative process. Jesse Jackson also took high school kids who were ready to occupy the building and walked them right back to school. Same thing, take my hand and let's go back to school. And then one of the senators from the Fab 14 that everybody loves so much, the day after he returned, proposed a constitutional amendment in Wisconsin to make sure that quorum could not be disrupted in the same way again, so they could never leave the state to do that. So, I mean, we have to call these things out. They're real. And the last thing I think, I mean, is not so much an organization of people as such, but we have to acknowledge the element of white supremacy in this movement. Because, I mean, even though Wisconsin is 90% white, and Madison is 83, 85% white, the movement did not reflect that at all. It did not. Then there was consistent calls by people of color leaders and people of color organizations to say, we want to participate in this movement. And we're not necessarily leaders of unions, but we need to have our interests heard. Like, we're going to be the primary people cut by bus lines going out or by healthcare going out. And then as the movement started to embrace the police and prison guards as well that came out for labor rights, they alienated a huge portion of people of color in Wisconsin who have been criminalized. I mean, Dane County's one of the worst places to be a person of color in the United States. So I think that all of these things came into play, and they were real things that we needed to address, and I don't know how we were going to do it. So I think that what that pointed to in the end was that there was a lack of capacity and independent infrastructure to really address these problems. You can have as much heightened consciousness and militant demand as you want, but if there isn't organizational capacity, if there isn't some body that can put that into play, and some place where people can talk it out, free of major players like the Democratic Party or AFL-CIO staff or whatever, then it's not going to be any good. I mean, like, you know, for a moment it's fantastic, it's seductive, it's wonderful, but I think that's exactly what's kind of happening to us right now, is that we're seeing all this potential and the door is closing. And then what are we going to do after that? And we're really in this period right now of trying to build the infrastructure that we desperately needed at the time. So I think that, I mean, the other thing that we should be keeping in mind too is, like, what was this moment? Like, what actually happened? I mean, I think that many people did not actually even know what union they belonged to, or what the number of their local was, or anything like that. I mean, this was the first time, and the people that did, this was the first time that they actually thought of a union as being something that advocated for them politically. That was like an actual mechanism for democratic participation in society. It was the first time that they ever thought about that, and there was no history for them to draw upon. And we really have to address, like, what a big deal this history was, because not only has there been 30 years or more of neoliberal policies that have been attacking working people, but all of these institutions have been working specifically to demobilize people for all this time as well. And even when the labor leadership needed rank and file member-to-member participation, they had to come to terms with the fact that for decades they had been working systematically to get rid of that, to make sure that people didn't know all of these things. So when they really, when they absolutely needed it, it wasn't there, and they had to work double time to get it. But they still weren't even willing. They would actually rather cease to exist than have members run their unions, and that's been a consistent problem. So I think I want to end with something a little bit more positive, really, because this is kind of a Debbie Downer thing, But I think that what this points to is that, first of all, we're going to leave this with a sense of, like, what our creativity is, and, like, how quickly people find struggle again and become inspired by it, and how rapidly these demands can develop when there is a political space for it to happen. But I think that you guys are extremely lucky, or not lucky, but I mean, you've done exactly what you need to do in building some infrastructure, like some kind of assembly that can hold that together and maybe realize some of that potential. So, and Adam's going to speak, I think, a little bit more about something that, about some of the on-the-ground experience and some of the strategic questions, and maybe something that's not so much of a bummer.